Hello listeners, Mark here with your first SLP short of 2022, and it's a chance to hear from one of our long-standing friends of the show, Steve Mascord. He tells us about his new book, Two Tribes, the story of rugby league's divided year down under in 1997 that led to the birth of the NRL. Steve gives us a flavour of the sort of stories you can expect, the legend and status of the people he has spoke to, and the impact and lessons of that year for the game both down under and the game in Europe. As Steve will tell us, it's far from just being about what happened in Australia. Plenty of famous figures from our game in the UK are also amongst the 100 or so figures interviewed by Steve for the book, some of who Steve gives us snippets about, as well as telling you about a special discount code on the book for Super League Pod listeners. So here's my chat with Steve. Steve Mascord, welcome back to SLP. It's been a while since we've had you on the show, and you've been really busy.
Yeah, I have been pretty busy there, Mark, as you are definitely aware, because that's why I was speaking, because I grovelled to you. But I've got a second book out, so I'm sort of on the trail of letting everyone know that that's available for them to buy if they wish, or to not buy if they also wish.
Well, let's hope there'll be a few people listening who either have been planning to buy it and just need an extra reminder to buy it, or weren't aware of it at all and get prompted to buy a book. Your first book, I have read your first book. I've not read your second book yet. Your first book was a very personal story. So your second book looks to be something slightly different. Do you want to tell us about the book?
It's very different. My first book was, people thought that they were criticising me, and I'd be hurt if they said it was self-indulgent, but I wasn't hurt at all. It was supposed to be. I'd read Nick Hornby and Chuck Klosterman and some of these, writers who wrote about their childhoods and their love of music and also sport. And that's what it was. It was just my attempt to do one of those. I read those books and I went, I could do that. So I had a go at doing one, and some people liked it, some people didn't, whatever. But this is a piece of journalism, so it's not about me at all. So I only mention myself where I think it might add to the story, because I'm old and I was around in 1997, which brings us to what the book is about. It's about the only year we had two competitions in Australia, the year of Super League, the 1997 season, and it's about how the NRL was formed. And I told the story by speaking to more than 100 people, including just about everyone you would want to speak to: Maurice Lindsay, Ken Arthurson, John Rebo, Neil Whittaker, John Quayle, Wayne Bennett, like pretty much everybody you would possibly want to speak to who's still alive, who lived through that period and played a big role in how things finished up for all of us, because that was the kind of earthquake that left us with the topography we have now in rugby league on both sides of the globe. Yeah,
so it's called Two Tribes. I assume that's because there was the two camps at the time. There was the Super League camp and there was the sort of ARL camp. So what...
The theme song for... Super League's kickoff was also a cover by a guy called John Stevens of the Frankie Goes to Hollywood song. And there's actually a story in the book about that song, the role it played in a certain person getting sacked, which even that person had no idea and won't have any idea if he hasn't read the book yet. that song actually got him sacked. So, and there's a lot of things like that in the book where no one who was involved actually knew the full story. And by talking to everyone, I was able to pull the full story together.
So we're coming at it with exclusives right off the top, because the first thing I was going to sort of ask you about the book is, can you tease us with any stories that might entice people into the book? And already you're talking about people getting fired without knowing the full picture of why that happened. So what sort of stories, I guess, are in the book that you think people will really get a kick from reading the full details of?
Well, there's Maurice Lindsay blaming Nigel Wood for the World Club Challenge, and Nigel Wood having a crack back at him. There's, how, Gary Hetherington heard about Super League at the World's Sevens in 1996, I think. And there's how the players, a player who was beaten up in his own bed on the Australian tour at the end of the year, and then waited downstairs for his Great Britain opponent to return for a rematch in reception the next day. Story that's never been told. And I would say there's 20 of those, just stuff from that year, people and maybe the results of what happened, but you don't know exactly what happened. And a lot of these things are things that I remembered from covering these tours and these events. I didn't report them at the time because they were just hearsay. But 25 years later, I can ring these guys up. They're as old as me, and they're happy to talk about it. So, I mean, there's someone even photographed a page about, the 1997 Canberra team who were in the UK for the World Club Challenge. They all went to an Ashes test. Mal Meninga went to an Ashes test in drag. A baggy green cap was nicked from the dressing rooms. The players were horribly drunk in the Australian dressing rooms, and Jason and Luke DeVico told me a story that basically Jason Croker said in the Australian dressing room, "Hit me over the head with a cricket bat," and Luke DeVico picked up a cricket bat that had been used in an Ashes test, Jason Croker took a false teeth out and put it in Shane Warne's hand. And then Luke DeVico repeatedly smacked him in the forehead with a cricket bat in front of the Australian cricket team. So all these stories, a plane on the way over almost crashed. All these stories were never told at the time, and we can tell them now. I mean, starting with the Great Britain tour in 1996, with Tolson Tollett being sent home to save money, came back to Australia, got on the piss with Neil Harmon for a week, then was flown back in because someone had an injury, went to training and was given $1,000 and told to go back to Australia again. So all these stories were never told at the time. You never read about them at the time, but you can read about them in this book.
So from the sort of UK perspective, there wasn't really a Super League war over here, was there? There was more yes, please give us what you can, and we'll do what you want us to do. Apart from a little bit of kickback about mergers. So, why was this such a big deal in Australia when it was just something that we let come into our lives and has been in our lives now for 26 years?
Well, it was only Super League only happened here. The only reason you've got Super League here now is because of a pay TV war in Australia that lasted a year. That's the only reason Super League exists. It's because basically the News Corporation wanted rugby league on TV. The ARL had already signed away their pay TV rights to someone else. And so in order to try to gain leverage and sign players and coaches and get rugby league on TV in Australia, they decided to spend a bit of money overseas. They signed up a bunch of players over here. Unfortunately, £87 million was actually pocket change for Murdoch when the bill in the end was something like $600 million. So I guess it wasn't pocket change, but they also got the TV rights as well, which they were already paying for. So the thing that you live with and talk about every day, the name of your podcast, is really just the sort of leftover vestiges of a ferocious pay TV war in Australia that's been over for 25 years.
Yeah, and the one legacy over here that we did sort of experience and go through was the big World Club Challenge that you've already kind of mentioned, the Canberra team and parts of that. So does that feature heavily in the book then, the World Club Challenge?
It's very much a book where the story over here is taken into account. I went up to Maurice Lindsay, Maurice Lindsay's place, and spoke to him. I spoke to Neil Tunnicliffe. I spoke to Steve Sims, spoke to Josh White, spoke to a lot of players who were playing in Super League at the time. Great story about Stuart Raper when he got the offer to play for Castleford, or not play for Castleford, coach Castleford. John Joyner was getting sacked. Yeah, he said, he said, well, how do I get a work visa? You want me over there next week? How do I get a work visa? And the club said, well, because you've got Welsh parents, Welsh-born, I think his mother, you can get right of abode. And he said, well, yeah, but that takes weeks and weeks. So he was telling his dad at the dinner table, and John Raper, who, as we know, is an immortal of rugby league, he said, hang on a minute. He picked up the phone, said, Wendy, could I speak to John? John, yeah, blah, 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 blah. All right. He goes, where? Yeah, okay. Where? Okay. He says, go down to Canberra tomorrow, go to this place and you'll get your visa. You'll be able to leave in 2 days. And he said, who's John? He goes, John Howard, who was the Prime Minister at the time. So that's, and Stuart Raper tells how he actually was so concerned about the Cas players getting so drunk and being such a mess when they went out to Australia for the World Club Challenge that he organised to get them all so sick that they threw up repeatedly for the first 3 days. Him and Mike Ford, they got together and basically had a day out, a night out, a barbecue, another night out, and everyone was so sick they didn't drink for the rest of the trip. So it is very much like I could have just taken out the Aussie stuff, and I still think it'd be quite a handy book telling about that season in England. Yeah,
it does sound like there's a lot of stories there, and as I said, I've not read the book yet, but one thing I was sort of expecting is it's going to be very much based on the split in Australia and the circumstances over there. But it does sound like it has a lot of content in that is relevant to the UK as well as finding out some other things about some of our stars from down under as well.
But it's not just about like funny stories, but it's also about conclusions. And I ask a lot of people about, including the historian Tony Collins, about what Super League meant for the game in the UK. Gary Hetherington's got some great stuff to say. Nigel Wood says some great stuff about what he believes is holding the sport back in this country, and I speak to players as well, obviously. So there's some serious stuff at the end where we try to reach some conclusions about what is Super League a blown opportunity for the sport in Britain and in Europe. When you look at News sent a letter to Maurice Lindsay at the end of 1996 saying, you haven't done enough. We demand that there are more expansion clubs. We demand that we have a better TV sport. We've given you all this money, and sure, it was to leverage our interest in Australia, but we didn't pay you more money to be given exactly the same. And really, that's what the British game gave News for the more money. They gave them exactly the same.
Yeah, and I suppose the like you said, the book's got lots of good stories in, but also this serious aspect, and that kind of brings me to one of the things I wanted to ask you about, actually, whilst we've got the chance to chat, Steve, because it's been a while. With the British game at the moment, we've been going through our own kind of two tribes sort of experience over the last 2 or 3 seasons, with the Super League removing itself from the RFL, and now, them taking some steps to try and reunify in some way, shape or form. Do you think within the book and within what you talk about that year where there was a separation in Australia, there's any lessons that we can learn now, 25 years on, in the sport in the UK?
Well, I think there is only that rugby league is basically, it's a garden full of seeds of discontent, and people will take any opportunity they can to break away. Just need someone to come along with a watering can, and the watering can is money. I think Super League probably thought with the TV deal, when they broke away, they thought that they could generate more money. They didn't like some things that the RFL were doing, and from what I understand, they're still driving a very hard bargain in negotiations, which is why we haven't had a reconciliation yet. So I think in rugby league, the only thing that basically saves us from having a Super League war every 6 months is that the rebellious people aren't given any money. And if the people who are upset, who've got the shits, find a fairy godfather, they'll head for the door as quickly as they can. And that's a repeated thing in rugby league. You say rugby league's biggest problem is it's poor, but in many ways, rugby league's biggest problem is disloyalty and short-sightedness and self-aggrandizement. And when we get money, we act on those instincts and we actually do even more damage. I think there is definitely, I think you should be able to and the great story of 1997 is